3 American planes destroyed an entire city. In Tokyo's underground bunker, Japan's top generals read the message and went silent. For 4 years, they believed they could win. In one blinding flash, they finally understood the terrible truth about American power. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, Field Marshal Hata was reading his morning reports. The war was going badly, but they had known that for months. Every day brought news of more losses, more cities burned, more soldiers dead. But they kept fighting. That was what soldiers did. Then Lieutenant Colonel Yamamoto burst through the steel door. He did not bow. He did not wait for permission to speak. In his shaking hands, he held a piece of paper that would change everything. "Sir," he said, his voice breaking. "Hiroshima is gone." Field Marshal Hata looked up slowly. "Another bombing raid?" "No, sir. Not a raid. One bomb. The entire city is destroyed." The room went silent. Hata read the message 3 times. It made no sense. Entire city destroyed by single bomb. Blast radius exceeds all previous bombardment. Unknown weapon type. Casualties catastrophic. Request immediate. The message ended there. Hiroshima had stopped transmitting. General Yumizu, chief of the Imperial General Staff, took the paper from Hata's hands. His face was pale. This must be a mistake. One bomb cannot destroy a city. It would take 500 aircraft. Maybe more. Our radar tracked 3 aircraft, sir, Yamamoto said quietly. Only 3. Admiral Toyota stood at the wall map where he tracked every American ship, every American plane, every American movement in the Pacific. For 3 years, his intelligence team had been very good at predicting what the Americans would do. They knew how many bombs it took to destroy a city. They knew how many planes were needed. They had watched American bombing raids destroy Tokyo, Osaka, Yokohama. 3 planes could not destroy a city. It was impossible. But by 10 a.m., reconnaissance pilots were reporting something they had never seen before. A mushroom cloud rising 40,000 feet into the sky. Colors they could not name. Purple and orange light that seemed to glow from inside. The cloud was visible from 150 miles away. At 11:30 a.m., a railway official arrived from outside Hiroshima. He had been 15 miles away when it happened. Foreign Minister Togo's secretary wrote down everything the man said, his hands shaking as he wrote. There was a flash, the man said. Brighter than the sun. Brighter than 1,000 suns. I closed my eyes but I could still see it through my eyelids. Then the sound came. Not an explosion. Something bigger. The ground shook. The air itself shook. I fell down. The train behind me fell off the tracks. He stopped, breathing hard. When I looked toward the city, it was gone. Just, gone. There was only fire. Fire rising into the sky. The mountains were glowing red from the light. At 2 p.m., the Supreme War Council met in complete silence. These were the men who had led Japan into war. These were the men who had promised victory. Prime Minister Suzuki placed the reports on the table. His hands were shaking. Gentlemen, he said. We must talk about what this means. General Anami, the Minister of War, spoke first. He had always been the strongest voice for continuing the fight. Even now, with half of Japan's cities in ruins, he believed they could win. They just needed more spirit. More dedication. More willingness to die. It is American propaganda, Anami said. They want us to believe they have a super weapon. But Hiroshima was destroyed by conventional bombs. Many bombs. They are lying to make us surrender. 3 aircraft, Admiral Toyota said. He never interrupted a general. Never. But today was different. 3 aircraft, Anami-san. Our radar tracked them. Our observers watched them. 3. The room fell silent. They all understood what that meant. For 3 years, Japanese military planning had been based on one idea: American industrial power could be beaten by Japanese fighting spirit. Yes, America could build more planes, more ships, more tanks. But Japanese soldiers would fight so hard, die so willingly, that American casualties would become unbearable. American mothers would demand their sons come home. American politicians would beg for peace. This idea had guided every decision since Pearl Harbor. When America built 300,000 aircraft, Japan's leaders told themselves that Japanese pilots, though fewer in number, would fight with 10 times the spirit. When American shipyards built cargo ships faster than German submarines could sink them, Japan believed American sailors lacked the warrior's heart. But a single bomb that could destroy a city meant something else. It meant that American industrial and scientific power had reached levels that made Japanese resistance meaningless. It meant that America had been developing secret weapons while fighting a war on 2 oceans at the same time. It meant that everything Japan's military leaders believed about modern warfare was wrong. Colonel Sato presented his analysis at 4 p.m. He was an intelligence officer who had been calculating American industrial capacity since 1941. His numbers had always been accurate. Terrifyingly accurate. America has produced 88,410 tanks during this war, Sato said. We have produced 6,450. America has built 41 aircraft carriers. We have built 15. American shipyards launch cargo ships so fast they replace losses faster than they occur. He paused. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. But if the Americans can destroy entire cities with single bombs, then they have scientific capabilities that make these numbers meaningless. They are not fighting the same war we are fighting. They are fighting a different kind of war. A war we do not understand. Foreign Minister Togo said what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say, and if they have one such bomb, we must assume they have more. To understand what happened in that room on August 6, you must first understand what Japanese military leaders had convinced themselves was true. In November 1941, before Pearl Harbor, Admiral Yamamoto had given a warning. Yamamoto had lived in America. He had studied at Harvard. He had visited American factories. He knew what America could do. I can run wild for 6 months or a year, Yamamoto had told the naval staff. But I have utterly no confidence for the 2nd or 3rd year. America's steel production alone exceeds Japan's total industrial output. Their petroleum reserves are unlimited compared to ours. If we fight them, we will lose. But Yamamoto's warnings were ignored. The army had built a different story, a more comfortable story. They wrote it down in strategic planning documents. They taught it to every officer. They repeated it until everyone believed it. The story had 3 parts. First, distance would protect Japan. America was 5,000 miles away. Every bullet, every shell, every drop of fuel would have to cross a hostile ocean. Japan could use nearby resources from conquered territories. America would exhaust itself just trying to supply its forces. Second, American morale would break. American society was soft. Americans cared more about comfort than honor. After losing 30,000 or 40,000 men, American mothers would demand peace. Japanese soldiers were willing to die. Americans were not. Third, Japanese tactical skill would overcome American numbers. Through superior training and fighting spirit, 1 Japanese soldier would equal 3 or 4 Americans. Quality would defeat quantity. These assumptions were tested at every battle of the Pacific War. And at every battle, they were proven wrong. At Midway in June 1942, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. The official assessment blamed bad luck and tactical errors. It did not question the underlying strategy. At Guadalcanal from August 1942 to February 1943, Japanese forces learned that Americans could sustain supply lines across vast distances. They learned that American soldiers could fight just as hard as Japanese soldiers in jungle warfare. The official assessment blamed local commanders for insufficient fighting spirit. It did not question whether the war could be won. By August 1945, every major assumption had been destroyed by reality. But senior leadership had never formally admitted this. They had reinterpreted every defeat as a temporary setback that required more determination, more sacrifice, more spirit. General Anami's continued belief that Japan could fight to the last citizen was not stupidity. It was the logical conclusion of beliefs that had never been questioned. The afternoon of August 6 was the first time in the entire war that Japan's Supreme War Council confronted their illusions directly. Colonel Sato presented what he called the reality assessment. His intelligence team had been compiling this document for 6 months. But until now, presenting it would have been considered treason. Speaking the truth had become a crime. The numbers were devastating. American aircraft production in 1944 alone, just 1 year, exceeded Japan's total aircraft production for the entire war. American shipyards were building escort carriers faster than Japan could train pilots to fly from them. American ammunition factories produced more shells in 1 week than Japan's factories produced in 1 month. But Sato's most damaging statistics were about scientific research. The Americans, Sato explained, have over 130,000 scientists and engineers working on military technology. Japan's comparable effort employs approximately 6,000. American research universities, Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Chicago, have larger physics departments than Japan's entire scientific community. He paused, letting that sink in. The atomic bomb required facilities that we could not have built even if we had known how. The Americans constructed entire cities in secret. Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Hanford, Washington. Los Alamos, New Mexico. These facilities consumed more electricity than major Japanese cities. They employed 130,000 workers. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, more than Japan spent on its entire war effort in 1944. Foreign Minister Togo asked the question that would echo through history: how could we not know? Sato's answer was uncomfortable but accurate. We knew, Foreign Minister. Our intelligence services reported on American industrial expansion continuously. We intercepted communications about large-scale secret projects. We documented their scientific recruitment efforts. But every report was dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. We chose not to know because knowing would require acknowledging that we could not win. Admiral Toyota added his own bitter assessment. The Americans fought this war with one hand tied behind their back. They fought Germany and Japan simultaneously while developing weapons we cannot comprehend. They produced more war material than we thought physically possible while maintaining their civilian economy at levels that exceeded peacetime production. They are not merely stronger than us. They are operating on a different level of civilization. This was the fundamental shift. For 4 years, Japanese propaganda had said Americans were weak, dependent on machines because they lacked spiritual strength. The atomic bomb proved this was catastrophically wrong. Cabinet Secretary Sakamizu wrote in his diary that night, "We have been fighting an enemy we never understood. We assumed they thought as we thought, that their society worked as ours worked, that their limits matched our limits. Hiroshima proves we were fighting blind." August 7 began with photographs. A reconnaissance aircraft finally penetrated the radiation zone over Hiroshima. The pilot, Major Kitamura, reported conditions he had never encountered. Updrafts so powerful they threw his plane 2,000 feet higher in seconds. Air temperatures that broke his instruments. Smoke rising in a column to the stratosphere. The photographs were developed by 11 a.m. Military analysts initially refused to believe what they showed. The city center, approximately 4 square miles, had been completely flattened. Not destroyed in the normal sense where rubble and building foundations remain. Flattened to bare earth. Buildings had been vaporized. Everything within 1 mile of the blast center had ceased to exist in any recognizable form. Intelligence analysts compared these images to the most devastating conventional bombing raid of the war, the Tokyo firebombing of March 9 to 10, 1945. That raid had required 334 B-29 bombers dropping 1,665 tons of incendiaries over 3 hours. Hiroshima's destruction was worse. And it had been accomplished by a single bomb from a single aircraft in a single instant. The Supreme War Council met again at 2 p.m. on August 7. But now they had new information that made everything worse. At midnight Moscow time, the Soviet foreign minister had summoned Japan's ambassador. The message was brief: the Soviet Union considers itself at war with Japan effective August 9, 1945. This destroyed Japan's last hope. For months, Japanese diplomats had been trying to get the Soviets to negotiate peace terms. The fantasy was that Stalin might broker a deal that let Japan keep some territory and avoid occupation. That fantasy was now dead. General Annemie's face went pale. Japan now faced enemies on all sides. American atomic weapons from the east. Soviet armies from the north. British forces from the south. Chinese resistance in occupied territories. The empire that had once stretched from India to the mid-Pacific was being crushed from all directions. Foreign Minister Togo presented the stark reality: we have 3 choices. Surrender unconditionally. Fight until every city is destroyed by atomic weapons. Or fight until Soviet and American forces invade and Japan ceases to exist as a nation. There are no other options. August 8 brought news that the Red Army had launched a massive assault into Manchuria. The Guangdong Army, once the elite formation of Japanese military power, was being systematically destroyed. Soviet tank columns advanced 50 miles in the first day. The Soviets were using thousands of American vehicles and weapons provided through Lend-Lease. American industrial capacity had not only sustained its own forces across 2 oceans but had also equipped its allies on a scale that seemed impossible. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The message from Nagasaki Regional Command was even briefer than Hiroshima's: second atomic attack. City destroyed. Casualties catastrophic. Then silence. The emergency session that afternoon was unprecedented in Japanese military protocol. For the first time, there was open acknowledgement of complete strategic failure. Navy Minister Admiral Yanai spoke with remarkable honesty for a military officer in that environment. The Americans have demonstrated that they can destroy our cities at will, one by one, until nothing remains. They have demonstrated they can continue this indefinitely. We cannot defend against weapons we cannot detect until they detonate. Our anti-aircraft systems are irrelevant. Our fighter aircraft cannot intercept what they cannot find. Our civil defense preparations are meaningless. Army Chief of Staff General Yumizu added his own assessment, something that would have been considered defeatist heresy weeks earlier. The atomic bomb changes fundamental military calculations. Concentrated forces become targets. Cities become targets. Our strategy of fighting to the last citizen assumes Americans must invade to occupy. But if they can destroy cities without invasion, our entire defensive doctrine becomes obsolete. They can simply eliminate Japan from existence without ever setting foot on our soil. Intelligence estimates calculated that America likely had between 3 and 7 more atomic bombs, with production capacity for more. Even if America had only 1 more weapon, the strategic conclusion remained the same. Continued resistance was suicide. That evening, the Emperor spoke privately with Cabinet Secretary Sakamizu. His words would become the foundation for Japan's surrender announcement. The unendurable must be endured. The atomic bombs have demonstrated that continued resistance will result in the complete annihilation of the Japanese people. We must accept terms that preserve the nation, even if those terms are painful beyond measure. But the path from this private admission to actual surrender required navigating military opposition that remained fierce despite overwhelming evidence. On August 10, Japan transmitted a surrender offer through Swiss diplomatic channels. The message was conditional: Japan would accept the Potsdam Declaration terms if the emperor's sovereignty was maintained. The American response, delivered August 12, was deliberately vague: the emperor will be subject to the supreme commander of Allied powers, but his ultimate status will be determined by the freely expressed will of the Japanese people. This created a final crisis. Military hardliners led by General Anami said this was unacceptable. They argued for continuing resistance despite atomic weapons. Their position was no longer based on winning. It was based on preserving national honor through destruction rather than accepting occupation. But by August 14, the emperor made his final decision. Japan would surrender unconditionally. The formal surrender ceremony took place aboard the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945. Foreign Minister Shigemitsu, who signed the surrender document, recorded his impressions. The harbor was filled with American warships as far as one could see. Hundreds of vessels. Aircraft filled the sky in formations that blocked the sun. The Americans displayed their power not through threats but through simple presence. This armada represented a fraction of their total military force, yet it exceeded everything Japan possessed at the peak of our strength. General Yumizu, representing the Imperial General Staff, noted that even the location was a lesson in American capability. We surrendered aboard a battleship built in American yards in less time than it took us to plan a single naval operation. The Missouri was one of dozens of capital ships they constructed while simultaneously fighting across two oceans and developing atomic weapons. We prepared for war for a decade. They prepared for 15 months and buried us. When American occupation forces arrived in late August, Japanese military observers documented details that reinforced their new understanding. A single American infantry division had more trucks than the entire Imperial Army. American supply operations delivered fresh food to troops while Japanese forces had been starving. American medical facilities treated injuries that Japanese military medicine considered untreatable. In September 1945, Colonel Sato compiled his final report titled, "Why We Lost, An Assessment of Strategic Miscalculation." The document provided brutal honesty. We lost the war in December 1941 when we attacked an enemy we did not understand. Every battle after that was simply the working out of inevitable mathematics. American industrial capacity exceeded ours by factors of 10 to 20 in every category. Their scientific establishment was larger than our entire educated population. Their resource base was effectively unlimited while ours depended on conquests we could not sustain. We fought believing spirit could overcome material. We were wrong. The American Occupation Administration gave Japanese officials access to information about American war production. The numbers confirmed their worst realizations. The United States had produced 88,410 tanks, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2,434,000 trucks, 17,000 rifles, 41,000 rounds of ammunition. More staggering, they had accomplished this while maintaining civilian living standards that exceeded Japanese peacetime prosperity. Former Prime Minister Suzuki, in conversations with American occupation historians, explained what Japanese leadership had finally grasped. We thought we were fighting a nation of merchants who valued profit over honor, comfort over sacrifice. We were catastrophically wrong. We were fighting the most productive civilization in human history, one that could simultaneously sustain a mass consumer economy and total war production. They didn't choose between butter and guns. They produced both in quantities we found incomprehensible. The Manhattan Project's details, gradually revealed to Japanese scientists, provided the most humbling lesson. The project had employed 130,000 people and cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire 1944 military budget. It required constructing facilities that consumed more electricity than major cities. It involved theoretical physics at levels Japanese scientists had not imagined possible. The atomic bomb was not just a weapon. It was evidence of scientific and industrial capacity that placed America in a different category of civilization. Admiral Toyoda's final assessment, written in 1946 for occupation historians, captured the complete reversal of Japanese military thinking. We began the war believing American democracy made them weak. Their diversity made them disunited. Their wealth made them soft. We ended the war understanding that democracy enabled innovation, diversity provided talent, and wealth funded capabilities we could not match. Every assumption we held was not merely wrong but precisely backwards. The psychological impact on military leadership manifested in different ways. Some, like General Anami, chose death rather than living with the reality of how badly they had miscalculated. Others, like Admiral Yanai, became advocates for complete demilitarization, arguing that Japan's militaristic culture had led to catastrophic strategic blindness. Most simply struggled to reconcile the warriors they believed themselves to be with the reality that they had led their nation into an unwinnable war through systematic self-deception. Japanese historians working under occupation supervision began documenting how thoroughly intelligence reports had been ignored. Accurate assessments of American production had been dismissed as defeatism. Warnings about American scientific capabilities had been suppressed as harmful to morale. Evidence that Japan was losing the war had been reinterpreted as temporary setbacks requiring more fighting spirit. The entire command structure had created an information environment where truth became treason and optimism became policy. One intelligence officer wrote in his private diary, "We had all the information we needed. We knew America's steel production. We knew their oil reserves. We knew their scientific capabilities. But we could not accept what the information meant because accepting it would mean admitting the war was unwinnable. So we convinced ourselves that spirit would overcome steel, that determination would defeat resources, that our willingness to die would outlast their willingness to fight. We were wrong about everything." The final lesson Japanese high command absorbed was perhaps the bitterest. American power had not been fully deployed. The United States had fought a two-ocean war while maintaining substantial forces in reserve, developing next-generation weapons, and preparing for conflicts that might follow. The atomic bombs represented not America's maximum effort but what they could accomplish while simultaneously doing a dozen other things. Japanese forces had fought with total commitment of every resource. American forces had fought with comfortable margins everywhere. By 1947, when American occupation officials conducted comprehensive interviews with former Japanese military leadership, the transformation was complete. General Yamizu's testimony to occupation historians summarized what Japanese high command had finally understood. "We lost because we never understood our enemy. We attributed to them our weaknesses, limited resources, narrow industrial base, inflexible thinking, when they possessed the opposite. We believed our own propaganda when we should have believed our intelligence services." He paused, and then delivered the most damning admission of all. The atomic bomb was not the cause of our defeat. It was the final proof that we had been defeated from the moment we started fighting an enemy we never truly comprehended. We learned too late that courage cannot defeat chemistry. Spirit cannot overcome steel. And determination means nothing when facing an enemy who possesses both determination and 10 times your capacity to give it physical form. In the years after the war, as Japan rebuilt under American occupation, former military leaders were forced to confront an even more uncomfortable truth. The Americans who occupied their country were not the soft, materialistic, spiritually weak people Japanese propaganda had described. They were engineers who rebuilt Japanese infrastructure better than it had been before. They were doctors who vaccinated Japanese children against diseases. They were administrators who helped establish democratic institutions. The Americans had not been weak because they valued comfort and prosperity. They had been strong because their system created comfort and prosperity while simultaneously creating the most powerful military force in human history. One former general, speaking anonymously to a Japanese newspaper in 1950, summed up the painful lesson. We spent decades preparing for war. We convinced ourselves that our warrior spirit made us invincible. We believed that Americans loved life too much to die for their country. Then we attacked them, and they showed us what real power looks like. They loved life so much that they built a civilization that could produce unlimited amounts of everything: food, medicine, weapons, technology, while never running out of young men willing to die to protect it. We thought love of death made us strong. They proved that love of life, combined with industrial and scientific might, made them unstoppable. That is the lesson we learned too late. That is what Japanese High Command finally understood when they saw what American power truly meant. In the decades after the war, historians collected the private statements of Japanese military leaders about the moment they finally understood. These words, pulled from diaries, letters, and interviews, reveal the psychological shock of confronting reality after years of delusion. Admiral Yamamoto, in a letter written before his death in 1943, only discovered after the war, "I told them we could not win. I told them America's power was beyond our capacity to defeat. They did not listen because they did not want to hear." General Tojo, during his war crimes trial, "We believed Japan's spirit was stronger than America's steel. We learned that steel, when you have enough of it, does not care about spirit." Admiral Toyota, in his memoirs, "The atomic bomb taught us that we were not fighting the war we thought we were fighting. We were fighting the 19th century war of courage and honor. They were fighting the 20th century war of science and industry. We never had a chance." Foreign Minister Togo, to American interrogators, "When I heard about Hiroshima, my first thought was, this is impossible. My second thought was, how could we have been so blind? We had intelligence reports about American atomic research since 1943. We dismissed them all." Colonel Sato, in his final report, "We lost the war in our minds before we lost it on the battlefield. We created an image of America that matched what we wanted to believe rather than what was true. That false image guided every decision we made. By the time reality forced us to see the truth, it was far too late." These words echo across history as a warning about the danger of believing what you want to believe rather than what the evidence shows. Japanese High Command finally understood American power when they had no choice but to understand it. But by then, 2 cities had been vaporized, millions were dead, and an empire had been reduced to ash. The lesson remains: reality does not care what you believe. And enemies who understand reality will always defeat enemies who prefer comfortable illusions. The story of what Japanese High Command said when they finally understood American power is not just a historical curiosity. It is a timeless warning about the cost of self-deception in the face of reality. In the summer of 1945, Japan's military leaders sat in their underground bunker and confronted a truth that had been available to them since 1941. Every number, every intelligence report, every piece of evidence had pointed to the same conclusion: they could not win. But they had chosen not to see it because seeing it would have required admitting their entire worldview was wrong. This is the most dangerous kind of ignorance, the kind where you have the information but refuse to accept what it means. Japanese High Command had convinced themselves that America was weak because Americans valued comfort. They learned too late that America was strong because it had created a system that provided both comfort and unlimited military power. They believed American diversity made the nation fragmented. They discovered that diversity provided access to talent from every corner of the globe. They assumed American democracy made decision-making slow and ineffective. They found that democracy enabled innovation and adaptation at speeds authoritarian systems could not match. Every assumption was not just wrong but backwards. The atomic bomb forced them to confront this reality in the most brutal way possible. In a single flash of light, all their carefully constructed illusions vaporized along with Hiroshima. They could no longer pretend that spirit would overcome material, that determination would defeat science, that courage would conquer industrial might. The words they spoke in those final days, words of shock, disbelief, and bitter understanding, reveal men confronting the collapse of everything they believed. These were not stupid men. They were experienced military leaders who had spent decades studying warfare. But they had allowed ideology to blind them to facts, allowed pride to override evidence, allowed nationalism to substitute for analysis. Their final testimony stands as a monument to the price of such blindness. As General Yamizu said in his last interview, "We did not lose because we lacked courage. We lost because we lacked wisdom. We had the information to know we could not win. We simply refused to believe it until reality forced us to understand. By then, millions were dead and our nation was in ruins." This is what Japanese High Command finally said when they understood American power: "We were wrong about everything, and our refusal to admit it cost us everything." That lesson echoes across the decades. Reality does not negotiate. Truth does not compromise. And nations that choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable facts will always pay the price.